Hey friends, thanks for joining me, Jim Baroud, to hear a few insights from leaders who represent our innovation ecosystem. Today's chat is with David Rosenberg, the co-founder and CEO of AeroFarms.
Great to be with you. I'm a serial entrepreneur. Currently, I'm co-founder and CEO of AeroFarms. That's my day job, my side hustle, if you will, saying that jokingly, but I'm also the chairman of the board of the Every Company. The Every Company, we're making proteins not through chickens, egg proteins, but through precision fermentation and scaling this up. And then also leading at the board level of Aspire. Aspire's one of the leaders in insect proteins. So instead of growing plants like you see behind me, we grow crickets and grow that for the pet food industry, but very focused on food and ag tech innovation. And again, proud to lead AeroFarms, where we're growing plants, whether it's on the equator or the North Pole, that could help feed humanity. Besides that, on the nonprofit side, I'm also a proud board member of the Liberty Science Center and very into like STEM education for our kids.
Fantastic organization. This is great. So much to talk about, David. Talk to us first about your entrepreneurial journey. I know you have a lot of experience, and I want people to understand where you're coming from.
So it started out of business school. I've been involved in startups before business school, from fintech to internet infrastructure, then business school at Columbia. And then I started a nanotech company, led that for 10 years. Was involved in waterproofing and concrete construction. And then from there, AeroFarms. Part of the journey from one to the other is the nanotech company was involved in concrete construction and preventing water and corrosion of concrete construction, water from coming into structures. And from that, learned how much water goes to agriculture and realized if one wants to solve water, one needs to solve agriculture. So looking at the space in agriculture and where to be relevant, I read something called Heitz's Law, analogous to Moore's Law, which talks about computing speed. Heitz's Law talks about the efficiency of a diode improving by 50% every 3 years. And it doesn't take too much math to realize that's going to have big impact. And conventionally, lighting in agriculture was used for hobbyists, which is a euphemism for people that are growing marijuana in their basements, but realized that this could have broad implication, huge impact, and decided from a business plan focus to focus on vertical farming, and then more specifically leafy greens because of the high rates of perishables. So they're highly perishable and high rates of food waste. And digging in there, it seemed like a great opportunity. But the parallels between whether it's the concrete industry and the agriculture industry, two massive industries that aren't going away. They're scaling up with population growth and urbanization and so forth. And there are also industries with decades of underinvestment. So there are tremendous inefficiencies in the supply chain. And when, as an entrepreneur, one sees inefficiencies as problems, then you go to solutions. So the better way to start a company is find a problem and then find a solution, as opposed to create a technology and find what problem to apply it. So it was the right way. And then it checked the boxes for having a company for me that has strong impact, starting with water and then expanding from there.
Got it. And tell us about when you started AeroFarms. How did you segue into that business?
So it's tough. And I'll share like two of the harder parts in life was like starting a company. It's like could be very lonely. My first company was essentially like a company of one for a couple of years. Here at AeroFarms, quickly brought in like two co-founders, and that like great people that certainly made the journey easier. And once the problem was identified, then quickly looking to the technical solutions. And we were working out of my house, and we found another company or another entrepreneur that was trying to solve the same problem. And here he had a vertical farm out of his garage. He was running out of his garage for a few years. And we came together and realized 1 + 1 = 3. we had a similar vision for the world, similar values, and what, like, bringing my energy, my appreciation that we need to scale this. Well, it's designed in this gentleman's garage, Ed Harwood's garage, doesn't scale. So how do we redesign every nut and bolt to have big impact? But we came together, and he had a greater background in agriculture. He was a professor at the Cornell School of Agriculture. I'm a kid from the Bronx. So besides the Bronx Botanical Gardens, there's not a lot of agriculture in the Bronx, but coming together with this shared vision, shared values, and then going from there, it really helped accelerate things. That said, it's taking much longer to scale than I anticipated, which is often the case. It often takes more time, more money, but it's a tough industry. People don't necessarily go into farming and say, hey, this is easy. It's not for the faint of heart, but certainly very rewarding. And we're making impactful movements in an industry working to not just grow leafy greens, but how do we change the agriculture industry?
Right. David, I didn't realize you were from the Bronx. So talk to us a bit about sort of your childhood and, what led toward your academic career and your entrepreneurial career. You mentioned some startups or earlier on. Talk to us about that. I think that's really interesting.
So what might be relevant, my mom was a philosophy teacher. She taught at Hunter College and then went on at Mount Sinai Hospital teaching medical ethics. And she really impacted me a lot, where a typical family dinner was very much the Socratic method. And she would bring issues in medical ethics that are like emotionally like draining. Like for example, she was on the liver transplant committee. So and she wrote a lot of the policies of who gets a liver and what's the priority list. And she would go through a case study that's like an actual example of what she's going through. You have two people, one liver, who gets it? And it's basically deciding who lives, who dies. And then press us, my sister and I, to give our opinion. And then she would come in and challenge our thinking, not necessarily tell us what she thinks, just challenging our thinking. And I think that in hindsight, while they were very draining emotionally conversations, it helped sharpen our critical thinking. And like, how do we think on the other side? How do we challenge assumptions and think through problems? And I really value those conversations. Certainly try and bring that with that interaction with my kids, and then just being around like the Wall Street world of New York City. That was my first foray into the job market. I went to college in North Carolina, UNC Chapel Hill. Wanted to go to experience a public school education. I grew up in the private school system, so got to see a greater diversity of social economic groups that I wasn't necessarily exposed to as much in New York City. One thing I learned to appreciate in New York City is you grow up fast. You do have a very international view of the world. You do have a greater awareness of there's a lot out there. You certainly, growing up in New York City, you think like New York's the best, but you also, like, there are a lot of cultures, a lot of different people that you interact with. So there's that broader awareness. Not so much in a place like North Carolina, where people aren't necessarily exposed to what you are in New York City. So I learned to appreciate you just got to grow up fast. And also having a public transit system, it's freedom. You get to take the subways, the buses, and get to be free at a young age. And also you learn how to watch your back. Like my kids in New Jersey, I realized, like, when I take them to the city, like teaching them life lessons, like where to stand on the subway tracks, and how to look behind you, and like where to put your wallet, things like that. But that you just don't appreciate, but it's second nature growing up in the city. Then a short stint at understanding like the banking world, Wall Street. Realized that wasn't for me in large part. And this isn't painting the industry with a large brush, but the place I worked at, I've never been around so many jerks in my life. And sometimes it's important to learn what you don't like as well as what you like. So I realized the importance of just working with people that I want to work with, like good people. And again, not painting banking or anything with like Wall Street with one brush, but certainly where I was at, it was a lot of about the individual as opposed to the group, and how do I advance and so forth. So learned what I didn't like. And then my next job, which was I basically helped carry the briefcase of my best friend. And I got to see my best friend start one of the most successful fintech companies. And that was invigorating because I saw what he did in disrupting a whole industry. For that, it was like online trading and how like ECNs and how stocks electronically move versus traditionally move. And it really shrunk margins of some of the big banks that are what's called market makers. And it was, again, exciting to see this small group really change a whole industry. And that gave me the excitement of entrepreneurship, the disruptive technology. At the time, actually still the case, appreciating that a lot of disruptive technology comes out of Israel. I joined a firm that's essentially an incubator that had some success with internet infrastructure companies, taking technology, leaving R&D in Tel Aviv, bringing business development to the US. So part of that business development team. And it was kind of cool seeing how the Israeli do things. I learned a lot and took a lot from that I try and apply to AeroFarms. As an example, like when I first got there were like people shouting at each other. And I was like, why are you guys all yelling? And I realized they're not yelling at each other with any sort of malice or anger. It was just debate. And while I could do away with some of the shouting, I very much appreciated it was non-personal. People were able to take it in a non-personal way. And it was actually an approach of getting at the truth. And they weren't attacking intent, they were attacking assumptions. And it was a very efficient way to solve problems because, especially in a startup world, one needs to make all these decisions with incomplete information. And you owe it to yourself to make the most informed decision with the information you have. And the way to do that is to attack assumptions. Assumptions, not intent. And that's exactly what was going on. So we could bubble up what the quality of different assumptions were to make an informed decision. And I really much appreciated that. And again, try and bring it to AeroFarms or my last company as well. The other thing I'll share that I appreciated is in the US, often we think our boss is smarter than us, wherever you are in an org chart. And in Israel, everyone thinks they're smarter than their boss. And if you want create a culture of challenging assumptions, it's empowering if you think you're smarter than your boss, which was very efficient at creating this world of challenging. It wasn't top down, and often people that are best informed are closer to the information. So the speed at which decisions were made, the ability to like really throw hard problems on the table is something that I greatly cherish there, and again try to apply to other places that I've had leadership roles. And then went to Columbia Business School, and then started my last company, and now AeroFarms from there.
That's great. That's really fascinating. Just a fascinating background. So you started AeroFarms. How many years ago has it been now?
2011.
Okay, 2011. So going on 12 years now. So talk to us about the industry. You guys are a superstar in the industry, but love to hear more about the dynamics that you're seeing in that industry, and then we could talk about some of the other industries that you're engaged in.
So I tell people like, don't paint the industry, vertical farming or controlled environment agriculture, as with one broad brush, and that's an important comment for a lot of young companies, whether it's startups, growth companies. What people often try and do, people want simplicity. And one way to do that is to say, oh, this industry or that industry, and this industry has success, this industry has failure, this industry is growing fast, whatever it is. But often it's, especially at a young stage, it's about winners and losers. And the devil's in the details, and how one wins. There's a lot of complexity to building a company. There's a lot of different risks. And I look at building a company of what are the different risks, what are the priorities and risks we need to retire, and how do we scale. and how do we systematize processes. But the point is, there's a lot of ways one can execute right. One could have the right strategy, or one could have the wrong strategy or the wrong execution, and so forth, and win or lose. And that's where it is about winners and losers. It's about people that make adjustments. My last company, we started off as a nanotech advanced material company. When the company was sold, we were really an insurance company. And going from one to the other was not a straight line, a very curious line that was very smart, that led us to the business plan that we had. At AeroFarms, when I got into this, I thought, well, this is easy. Like, we'll grow plants indoors. And for one thing, biology is tough. I mean, just think of like raising your kids. You have two kids, two parents, same household, and how different they are. Like plants, it's not like a widget. It's like you have all this complexity, and scaling biological systems adds more complexity, because what you solve at small scale might be a different solution than what one solves at big scale. So and this is all contextual, because the industry is going through like a figuring it out moment. And every month, transparently, there's like another vertical farming company that's going under. And this is very much expected, and something I've been broadly broadcasting for years. And what I've said is, there's not an obvious networking effect like in Facebook, Airbnb, Uber, or something, where you have one winner and everyone else is a loser. You need to be on that network. You could have, and you will have, several winners, but there are going to be a lot of losers. So people read about AeroFarms, they hear me speak, whatever, they feel inspired, and they're like, hey, I want to do that too. And there are a lot of good, well-intentioned people that want to get into this. And a lot of them were successful raising money. This is going to be a massive industry. And if you look at the macro trends, it suggests it's going to be a massive industry, like the macro trends such as volatile weather. You see it on the news every day. That impacts agriculture, makes it harder to farm. You look at depletion of arable land, farmland. The world's lost 30% of its farmland in the last 40 years. You look at population growth. That alone tells you there's tension. You look at depletion of our water, or there's droughts, there's floods. All of these things make it harder to farm. And then on the other hand, you look at technology enablers. You look at, like in vertical farming, a light emitting diode. Just think of how many diodes and LEDs are in your house now versus 5 years ago versus 10 years ago. So as that cost, upfront cost goes down, as the operating cost goes down, LEDs go up. That's really the enabler of vertical farming. But that, coupled with robotics, automation, AI, genetics, there's all these different features that are technology enablers to reduce capital costs, reduce operating costs, grow better products. So in that sense, again, it's going to be a massive industry. But people simplistically, competition, say, oh, this looks great, I want to jump on that train. And then they realize, wow, it's really hard. And people shouldn't get into farming because they think it's easy. It is not for the faint of heart. And it's not just about growing. So behind me, this visual is our grow towers. But there's so much more. And there's a lot of importance to growing a plant, but it's how do you get the right seeds? How do you seed? How do you germinate? How do you harvest? How do you package? How do you sanitize? The environmental controls, the SOP, standard operating processes, all these, the digitization. It's, for us, it's not just the MES or the user interface, it's the SCADA system, the industrial controls, the PLCs, the program logic controls that tie right into the ERP. And the point is, there's a lot of complexity that gets underappreciated. And as a consequence, a lot of companies are failing. It seems like one every month. And companies incorrectly think, hey, I've done it small, I could easily do it big. You do it too fast and you don't respect the process, and one's building monuments of failure, expensive monuments of failure. It takes time to build, it takes time to learn from, it takes time to course correct. It's tough. I'm very bullish on AeroFarms. I'm very bullish on the industry, but there has been, and there's going to continue to be, a lot of pain, as there's, like, the winners are separated from the losers, or the companies that are having success are separated from the ones that aren't.
That's so interesting. So what you're saying is it's so much more complex than just a typical factory. There's so many other factors that are involved that could go wrong. and it's harder to scale.
Yeah, more specifically, it's much more complex than just growing a plant. So some people think, hey, I grew a potted plant, I could be a farmer. No, it's different. And there are all these ancillary elements that make a farm successful. It's not just about growing. It's about a successful business. It's about customers. I mean, the difference between growing a product or having a product people want and having a product is huge. I used to joke around with this about that with a friend of mine, Adam Lowry, who's the founder of Method, the soap company, and Ripple. And so many people don't get that. And here's a guy who disrupted the soap industry with a product, a beautiful product people love. And here, what I'm proud of is like we at AeroFarms, we like from a leadership standpoint, there's certain things we as leaders do, and part of it is ensure there's priority and simplicity of message so people can produce, can go out and execute. So one of them is like, don't grow a plant unless it's distinctive and great. So our team knows, unless we have distinction and great, don't grow it. And I hope the audience here, you're all customers for one. I'm obviously biased, but I think it's the best product in the industry. So go to your supermarkets and look for AeroFarms. If they're not on shelf, ask them to bring it on shelf. But any Whole Foods in the country, we're there. Any Amazon Fresh, we're there. Any we're there. But it's also in Walmart's, Fresh Direct, Stop and Shop, ShopRite. We're not in all of those stores, but we're in all Whole Foods. But the point is, when you try our product, first, don't put salad dressing. This is leafy greens. Go buy, you'll see different SKUs, different varieties, buy one of each or whatever. Try it without salad dressing. You'll probably say, this is the best arugula, kale, water, whatever it is that I've ever had. And then also know that I believe we operate the safest farm. So not only are there no pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, which are, if you think about it, those are chemicals meant to kill something that are on our fruits and vegetables. And organics, people incorrectly think have none of that. They just have organic of that, like most of the time, like 90%. Here, I joke around like snake venom's organic. It doesn't mean you want it in you. But here, we don't use organic pesticides, herbicides, fungicides. We use zero pesticides, herbicides, fungicides. When you eat our product, don't wash it because there's nothing to wash off. So here, I think it's the safest product. We have excellent SOP, standard operating processes, to reduce risk of any infestation, and it's great quality, safe product, and lead by brand, so people enjoy it. So that's the priority in which I direct the team. Focus on quality. And then another example of like simple messages: after quality, don't do anything unless we hit quality, then go by yields, how much output it is, which relates to cost of goods sold, then go by volumes. But as one scales up these biological systems, you have to, again, have a process that works. And it's like, and then apply that for leafy greens to now berries to something else, and so forth. And like with berries, back to respecting the process, for years, for about 4 years, we've grown 70 varieties of berries. We're hitting quality, we're hitting yields. Now we're working to hit volumes. And how do we have a price that hits a price point that works for big parts of our population, so we could really change the world?
What's the most popular lettuce and what's the most popular berry?
So we're not selling berries now. We're if you come over, you could eat one of the best berries you've ever had, but we're not commercialized. We're working on scale. From a leafy green, it's I think people really enjoy our rainbow mix, which has some color to it. My personal favorite is I like spicy. It's a wasabi that has some nice like horseradish feel. It like cleans your sinuses. My second favorite is broccoli, and this is an example of the innovation at AeroFarms. It's not, if you look at it, it looks nothing like a broccoli. It actually won, I forgot the name of this award. Whole Foods gave it like an award of something equivalent of like best product of the year. And it was the first time they ever gave this award to a fruit or vegetable, I believe. And here we innovated because it's we grew what's called and we sell what's called the cotyledons, or the receptors. What that means is, imagine before the broccoli that you and I know of a broccoli grows, this little receptor pops up, and its job is to tell the rest of the broccoli to grow. And we harvest that receptor and we serve it, and it has strong nutritional density like broccoli. Broccoli is very healthy, and it also has this faint taste like a broccoli, but it doesn't look like a broccoli. It's delicious and extremely healthy. So I like those two products. My favorite.
That's great. And I know I asked you this question years ago. Is there any prospect of, with cannabis becoming more widespread, is that a possibility, or some might ask about mushrooms? Is that even on the horizon, a possibility?
Well, two ways of answering that. First, three ways. One, philosophically, I'm not pro like cannabis being legal. I believe unless something's going to directly hurt someone else, like part of our constitution is about providing freedoms to people, not limiting freedom. So I'm for that. And I was actually, Governor Murphy had me co-chair his transition committee in ag, and this was one of his agenda items. And I'm glad we were able to make that legal here in New Jersey. So philosophically, it's not an issue. What we try and do at AeroFarms, we could grow anything. We like to say we could grow anything. It doesn't mean we grow everything. So we like to say, what are we uniquely positioned to have impact on? And what that means is, where is there a market problem, and where can we provide a solution to that market problem? And here we're very focused on what that is. There's like too many directions one could go. And to date, with like what we're focused on is leafy greens on the execution and scale side, not just domestically, but internationally, and then looking for those next crops like berries. So the other crops, like we've grown different, we've grown 550 varieties of plants. It's a big number. Most people couldn't name 550 varieties of plants. But we've commercialized 18. So that tells you two things. It tells you, one, it's really hard to go from one to the other. Growing it doesn't mean you hit all the points to commercialize it at scale. And two, it tells you our ambition's really high. So we will continue to reduce capital cost, operating costs, and sell more product, more varieties, increasing the total available market. But it just takes time. You have to honor the process. And part of when we do launch a product, we ask, can it have broad adoption? So if one sells at a super high premium and you're creating a company just for a few rich people or something like that, that's not the world AeroFarms wants to play in. We want to play in a place where we could have broad impact. So it is important that we're not just in the Whole Foods, the fresh markets, the Sprouts. We just launched at HEBs. Those are like arguably the four biggest retailers in the natural section of food. But it's important we're in the Walmarts, the ShopRites, and other retailers as well. We're also in food service and things of that nature.
And so what is the vision for the company?
The vision is to enable growing so people could enjoy fresh food all over the world, and also to have a positive impact in agriculture. So having a positive impact so people could have fresh food all over the world. We're expanding in the Middle East, where we like to say we could grow on the equator, we could grow on the North Pole. It doesn't matter. What matters is, what does the plant want? So temperature, humidity, nutrients, micronutrients, light, all of those at a touch of a keystroke we could create. So in the Middle East, for example, they don't have it's harsh environment. They don't have a lot of farmland. They don't have a lot of fresh water. They import 80 to 90% of their fruits and vegetables. We could enable local food production in a place where energy is relatively inexpensive. Labor also is less expensive. So in some parts of the world, the business model actually works better than in other parts of the world. And that's obviously part of our lens as we decide where to go.
Is the business model to build these around the world, or is licensing a possibility down the road?
It's all, well, I would say the two could go hand in hand. So we want to build these all over the world. And how we do so is important, whether it's on our balance sheet or someone else's balance sheet. We're flexible. What's important for AeroFarms is we design it, build it, hire people, train people, and sell a branded product. So the operations is really important. It's the systems are complex. We have 150 SOPs, standard operating processes. It's too new to say, here you go, good luck to you. So we're not equipment sellers. I don't think that I don't think that's the right business model of where this industry is and its maturity. So we are very much involved in the operations. We're a technology company and we're an operating company. Early on, we realized to be great at one, we have to be great at both. There's certain elements of bespoke technology that's just not evolved. Like I could go into details of, like if you look behind me, lots of different items we've had to innovate. We partner with lots of people. We have partnerships with some of the biggest technology companies in the world, some of the biggest agriculture companies in the world, a host of different things. And we're excellent at partnering. We're excellent at saying, what are we uniquely positioned to solve? And where do we want to bring in partnerships? And I'll give you an example. We thought it was important to image every plant every day. And quickly we realized that's beyond AeroFarms' capability. It's one thing to have a camera, it's another thing to have a camera all over a facility to image every plant every day. Once we came to the determination it was beyond our capabilities, and it's who do we partner with? And here we partnered with, proud to say, another great New Jersey company, Bell Labs. And Bell Labs brought in 18 engineers to work with us to develop our systems to image every plant every day. And we put a structure together that works for them, works for us. And it's incredibly meaningful to how we track the quality of the plant. But the point is, who do we partner with? What do we stay core good at? And how do we bring in other parties to help us improve quality, reduce capital costs, reduce operating costs?
And use drones for that, right?
We do. We decided, and that was the best way within, like the facility behind me, within under 10 drones, you could image every plant every day, as opposed to imagine other solutions we were looking at is have a camera on every level or have cameras every 7 feet on every level. It was getting overwhelming with thousands of cameras. And even though cameras are getting less expensive, the solution we have, while it's taken us years to co-develop, it's a much more elegant solution.
That's fascinating. So what is the number of installations or factories or that you have now, and how many do you want to have in 5 years, in 10 years?
Yeah, I won't give specific numbers, but in terms of how we're expanding, but I'll share, like today we have 3 that we're operating. And just one other piece on like the Bell Labs, it's not just about hardware, but it's hardware and software. So how do you take an image of a plant? There's width, height of a plant, stem length, the ratio of that, curvature, spotting, ripping, discoloration. It all means something. And here our plant scientists work hand in hand to make sure that from a machine vision standpoint, machine learning standpoint, one understands what's being read and how to identify those characteristics. On the scale standpoint, it's one thing we're proud of is we're selling in a broader distribution from a facility. And that's because we realize what the customer wants isn't necessarily local. What the customer wants is great taste, great texture. And here, well, maybe for your audience, is to illustrate the sophistication of not only AeroFarms, but more importantly, what one could do to a plant. So in a similar way, if I exercise differently, if I eat differently, if I sleep differently, I have the same genetics, but my biochemistry is different. I'm healthier or less healthy. In a similar way, as funny as it sounds, I could get a plant to eat, sleep, exercise differently and change its phytochemistry. So our research and development team, coupled with our FSQA, food safety quality team, stressed a plant to enhance its shelf life. So they added 3 more days to a shelf life of the plant just by stressing it. That means giving it a burst of cold, hot, water, less water, like changing those environmental conditions to influence the morphology of the plant, make it a little tougher so it could last a little longer. And now we could ship product at a greater distance, but really keep that high quality.
That's amazing. I mean, that is truly amazing, and without preservatives, right? This is making them stronger and organic, and that's amazing. So, are these vertical farming facilities, are they the answer to our global sort of challenges in feeding the world, or is it just a subset? It's impossible to scale enough.
So here, like we really as humanity need to look in a very multi-dimension, holistic way, and the solutions aren't going to come from any one place. Like in agriculture and farming, you have field farming, you have greenhouse farming, you have vertical farming, and they all play a role. Where a plant should grow at certain parts of the year in some parts of the world, sometimes should be field farming, sometimes should be greenhouse farming, sometimes should be vertical farming. What I'll say is the cost structure is moving so fast, and the way we at AeroFarms are growing plants, reducing capex and so forth, reducing OpEx, that what we grow and grow profitably is going to expand. So our impact is going to increase, but it's going to be a while. Like most of feeding humanity is what's called the row crops: soy, rice, wheat, corn, and it's certainly going to take longer for relevancy to happen in those sectors. But the amount of products that are grown vertically is going to increase. The other part I'll share is it's as much about human behavior as it is about technology. So people have to realize it's not about consuming calories, it's about consuming nutrition. And we need to change our diets. We also need to start asking better questions societally about not only what's in our product, but how it was grown and the resources to grow it. So as an example, at AeroFarms, we could grow using approximately, in the growing, 5% or less than 5% of the water that's otherwise used to grow in the field. So how do people bring that into their calculus of decision making when it's not necessarily represented in cost or price? Sometimes because from a policy standpoint, we keep water prices artificially low. And here, back to holistically, we need to work in a multifaceted way where there are very well-intentioned policymakers who don't appreciate the impact of some of their decisions. So as an example, if one keeps water prices low, then you're really taking the incentives from an entrepreneur to solve water. So the fact that AeroFarms puts in the capital cost of filtration to take out algae and plumbing to keep water in closed loop systems, the fact that AeroFarms invested dehumidification to take water that a plant transpires and bring it into closed loop systems and use that water, there's not really an economic value or motivator for that because water is so inexpensive. The fact that AeroFarms doesn't pollute to our open systems, we don't have pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, or over fertilize that leads to algae blooms at dead zones. There too, it's not necessarily an economic incentive to do so. So we need policyholders, carrot and stick, to put economic incentives for these externalities that aren't in the calculus of commerce. How do we provide the right incentives for the entrepreneur, the innovator, to solve hard problems? And at the same time, we need consumers, people buying, to ask not only the what, but the how. So it's important to ask, hey, are there pesticides, herbicides, fungicides on our product? Let's be informed. What does that do for human health? Is there methyl bromine being applied to fields to hurt pathogens that is the number one contributor to ozone depletion? Is that happening in field farming? And what types of crops, like strawberries, is that happening in? But how do we get the consumers to ask the right questions? How do we get the media to illuminate some of these problems so people know to ask the right questions? How do we, as innovators, train people and educate people to ask these questions? And obviously, how do we lead with quality and explain what quality is? And we could do that in concert with policyholders. It makes a big difference. Yeah. And then it also ties into what's exciting. There's a renaissance going on in food and ag tech, where from an investment standpoint, people understand there's been underinvestment in these sectors for decades. The sector's feeding people isn't going away. Population growth, it's increasing. And there are other innovations. So like the company I'm part of, we are producing basically egg proteins through precision fermentation. So from an impact standpoint, and if you look at how much water and resources go to feeding a chicken that produces an egg versus what we're able to do through precision fermentation to chemically produce the same qualities of an egg and the same properties that one wants an egg for. Like in cooking, you want it for binding, gelatinous properties, or foaming. We could produce that. Where should we put resources? How should we reward entities that are innovating in this way? And the customers are starting to ask the how, not just the what, as well as the manufacturers, the bakers, and so forth. Same thing with cricket protein. Here, from an ick standpoint, it might be hard to get over the I'm going to eat cricket protein, which is an incredibly efficient way to consume proteins or to produce proteins. We're selling a dog food, a pet food. The dogs don't seem to mind, and it's an excellent source of protein. But from an efficiency standpoint, it's the most efficient way I've seen of producing a protein. So back again, it's part human behavior, and it's part technology, it's part policy. But there's tremendous technology in the ag and food sector that gives us reason to be optimistic.
Well, that's really illuminating. I never would have thought all those things you just mentioned, but I guess it really is saving the planet, right? I mean, especially with water shortages, extreme weather, global warming, climate change, right?
100%. And it pops up in ways that aren't intuitive. So it's not just we read about droughts and floods and so forth, but all of a sudden, if you have a warm shock and the birds fly north or fly south at different times than you'd otherwise expect, and they poop on fields, you might have to throw out a whole food because of potential food contamination. So in leafy greens, as an example, most food contamination, think of all the recalls, Listeria, Salmonella, E. coli, are in leafy greens. 11% of all food contamination, the number one category in food contamination. And how do you reduce that? So it's just, and with volatile weather, it's becoming harder. So it's yet another example of how innovation could help solve some of these problems that unfortunately, environmentally, there are more and more of. I mean, methyl bromide being applied to the soil is to kill pathogens. Some plants, like strawberries, are highly susceptible to disease, but we're used to industrial farming where we kind of spray all these chemicals, put these chemicals on that have big impact. I mean, it could methyl bromide have this detrimental impact on the ozone layer. Others that leave, the way we've been industrial farming, leave carcinogens in our soils. So a lot of our soil is contaminated. In some parts of the world, without naming names, it's estimated that as much as 80% of farmland's contaminated with heavy metals. Those are carcinogens like cadmium that's being absorbed by the plant. I mean, leafy greens are healthy because they absorb minerals and elements. If they're absorbing cadmium, that's getting in the product that's getting into our food source. So here too, ask about the what, not just the how. Ask about the how, not just the what. And a lot of this is underreported and not really messaged out. People aren't aware. So there's huge human health impact, huge environmental impact that we all need to make sure people are informed consumers, informed customers.
Yeah, no, this has been so informative and educational. Thank you, David. Now, so having said all that, are you hopeful that technology and innovation will provide the solutions to, helping us with all the challenges, weather, population that we have?
I am, as an entrepreneur and innovator, I'm very optimistic. At the same time, we need tremendous urgency. I was co-founder of the Circular Economy Task Force for the World Economic Forum, the Young Global Leader community, and I was a member of the B20 that advises the G20 in resource efficiency, representing the US. And I mention that because you kind of see in these bigger organizations how little is done. Now we have COP28 coming year over year. So somehow systematically, our policyholders are not able to move society as fast as we needed to. And we have huge environmental problems. Urgency is there. Again, just look at the volatile weather of what's going on. Here we are in New Jersey. We didn't really have one snowfall all year. So we have these very atypical weather patterns that are becoming more typical. And that impacts farming. It impacts food creation. So we need to act with urgency. We need to do things to reduce the negative environmental impacts, whether it's coming from agriculture or it's coming from other places. And we need to accelerate the way in which we innovate. Some of that is through commerce, some of that's through funding. There are funding gaps in our capital market system. So in the US, we're excellent from a capital deployment standpoint, but it doesn't mean we're good enough. And one of the challenges in these capital intensive, like businesses like AeroFarms, is senior debt. So if you don't have like true senior debt, then you have to put a lot of equity, and that could be very expensive. And here, true senior debt, like when you buy a home, they want to see history. So if you're innovating and you don't have that history, then you have to pay equity for big, big expensive projects. So there are gaps that need to be filled, and there are ways we need to figure out how to fill that. And we're also in a challenging capital markets time where a lot of players are sitting on their hands because you've had, I don't know if it's relevant for the audience getting to the why, but you had a lot of players that get into venture that don't really understand venture, don't really understand growth, made some arguably bad bets, and now feeling the pain for that in this correction, but also it's preventing other capital from being deployed. So like at AeroFarms, like we're looking elsewhere where people are deploying capital, like the Middle East. And here there's like money being invested. We're fortunate. I've done business in the Middle East for 20 years. AeroFarms, we've built a facility in Abu Dhabi. We've been like, just because of the alignment in our value proposition, where you don't have a lot of arable land, you don't have a lot of fresh water. Years ago, we realized this is an area that we should focus on. We've built it. We've built teams. We've built facilities, and we are like committed to expanding in that region, not just the U.S., but in that region. So I think we're better positioned than others. But the frozen nature of capital deployment, especially in venture and growth stage companies, is a real thing and a challenge to them and for a lot of technology companies.
Yeah, no, for sure. But this has been a great conversation. Before we end, though, David, I want to ask you two things. One is, can you share just one thing that the advice you give entrepreneurs who want to scale their company?
The devil's in the details often. You can't be afraid of the details. You can't be afraid of just digging in, understanding what's going on, and pushing it to, like, so some people stay at a very high level, and I've seen it in like vertical farming where people just talk about the macro environments, but to succeed often, like you gotta really dig in and understand the details of your business, understand the real drivers of finance, of the economics of the system, and lean in there. And at the end of the day, you need to, like I said earlier, it's not just about producing a product, but producing a product people want. And so it often comes out to like the ABCs, whether it's vertical farming or another industry. It's the ABCs of building a business are applicable in one industry versus another.
Got it. And we usually end, David, with a quote or a saying or a poem. What would you like to share with us today?
So here, I'm appreciating this question was coming. I pulled up a quote from my favorite book, The Lorax. And for context, this is Dr. Seuss produced this book or wrote this book on the environment. And here, the Onceler is talking to, he basically, through industrialization, industrial manufacturing, really hurt the environment. And he's trying to give hope to this child who wants to help the environment. So he says, catch, calls the Onceler. He lets something fall. It's a trufula seed. It's the last one of all. You're in charge of the last of the trufula seeds. And trufula trees are what everyone needs. Plant a new trufula, treat it with care, give it clean water, and feed it fresh air. Grow a forest, protect it from axes that hack. Then the Lorax and all his friends may come back.
Excellent. So appropriate. And I remember watching that movie, actually. It was really thoughtful. So, David, this has been great. Wish you much success. And I'm so glad we have great entrepreneurs like you, not only in this state, but in this country, on this planet, right? You are the key to sort of the future. So thank you for all the work you've done.
Yeah, thanks so much, James. Great being with you.
Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please like it, leave a review, and subscribe. See you soon.